Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Hunter, and I am a senior editor here at Livelong Media. I'm very, very excited today to welcome an Emmy Award winning journalist, speaker, and the best-selling author of The Joy of Connections. Her name is Allison Gilbert. She is also the host of Connected Lives, which is 92NY's only conversation series, which explores togetherness, belonging, connection, loneliness, and all of these topics that are really relevant to social health and being able to have a fulfilling life, which is something here at Livelong we always strive to achieve and evoke because the people you're with matter just as much as what you're putting into your body, how much you're working it out. So I am so excited today to talk to Allison and talk about feeling connected, feeling lonely, and just feeling all of our feelings and exploring life together. So, Allison, thank you very much for being here today.
What a thrill to be with you. Thank you for having me. I feel connected already.
You feel connected. You're feeling through the. Is that actually something though? I am curious. When I'm seeing you on a screen, is there a certain element of connectability that's able to happen despite the literal not being there-ness of it?
Of course. In fact, the research bears that out. There are gradations of how we feel connected, but what this has to offer is eye contact. You can hear my voice. You can hear the tone that I am using. You can know whether I'm snarky. You can know whether or not I'm being playful. So there's very little way that gets lost in terms of tone. If you think about when we text, so much gets lost, so much gets misinterpreted potentially, whether you're typing in all caps, whether or not you're using an emoji or not. So it really does capture some of what we are missing when we do text communications. At least we're hearing each other, at least we are seeing each other, but in-person connection will always be the best.
Yeah, the texting that would have saved me a lot of anxiety from texting, you know, people in relationships and the waiting and the anticipation and not knowing if you said the right thing. There's so much anxiety with
Yeah,
that.
but you know what? Research from the Kinsey Institute in Indiana, it shows actually that when we use emojis in our text, especially when we're talking about romantic relationships, it's been proven to heighten those connections because emojis replaces what we don't have with texting, that face-to-face recognition of mood. So when you use an emoji like a happy face or a heart or whatever you're going to be using, you actually increase the amount of connection because you're decreasing the amount of disconnection that comes from when you're not really sure what someone means. So use those emojis.
That, yes, that is definitely noted. And it's actually something we do in the newsletter we write. I tend to implement emojis because I feel as though it adds to the understanding of something. It also makes it feel a little less clinical because sometimes words can feel clinical. So you want to add a little bit more life
Well,
because when we're talking like the two of
playfulness
us,
is good. Yes,
playfulness
playfulness is
is
good.
good. Something I want to ask you about as we get older and this idea of playfulness and joy and optimism, I know there's a narrative that as we age, we become a little bit more cynical and jaded, curmudgeon-y. I think of the movie Up. So the grandpa from Up, he lost his loved one. Life happens, and we get a lot of wounds that might impact our ability to connect with people more. Can you can you talk a little bit about why the idea of aging and going through life can compound into having a harder time, maintaining relationships and maintaining optimism when it comes to forming relationships?
Well, let me say that what the science shows in terms of cognitive behavioral neuroscience is that as we get older, we become more and more in love with patterns, something that is familiar, friendships, relationships that feel comfortable. And so when you go through midlife or aging shifts that push you into a discomfort zone, that is really antagonistic to what our brains really crave at that joint time, at that juncture. So what I mean by that is if you experience loss, career shift, that's an adverse input to how your brain is seeking patterns. And so if you recognize that, we can be proactive in how we change our outlook to form new relationships, which is so important as we maybe pivot in our careers, as we maybe downsize and move, maybe as we let go of certain relationships that are no longer working for us, if we're separating or we are divorcing, or maybe we're getting used to what it's like to be an empty nester. So as much as we can become more nimble and kind of fight back our neuroscience that keeps us to patterns that we recognize, we are much more capable of building better and more meaningful relationships.
What would you tell someone who is stuck in a pattern? Let's say it's not conducive to meeting people. You know, you watch the news every morning and then you make your scrambled eggs, or let's say you've come into, but there's the argument, I'm comfortable. Is that a good enough reason to keep following a pattern, or is there a certain benefit and maybe a health benefit that I wouldn't think of from first blush of saying, you know what, even if it's not comfortable, I'm going to go out to a coffee shop or I'm going to say hi to the neighbor. It's like, it's little things, but can you just explain to me the argument for feeling comfortable and feeling, familiar with patterns?
Yeah, of course. Listen, we all face that same headwind. When you want to begin exercising, there is discomfort in joining the gym, getting up in the morning, maybe going after work. You have to make the time. It's a pain. You don't really want to go, but you got to put on the gym clothes. You got to maybe go shopping for the gym clothes to go to the gym. There are, of course, these headwinds. But if the goal is longevity, if the goal is extension of life and to have a more fulfilling life while we are living it, then we must get over that initial hurdle to embrace what's next. That is for our physical health. That is, of course, for our mental health. And now, what we are talking about today, and the World Health Organization really underscored it this past summer by proclaiming that across the world, 870,000 people are dying prematurely every single year because they are not feeling connected. That tailwind that pushes you out the door has to become stronger than the headwind that keeps you planted on the couch watching Netflix or scrolling on your phone. You have to decide with agency, like you would about going to the gym, that your physical health is just as important as your social health. And that is what The Joy of Connections, this book that I wrote with Dr. Ruth, is all about. This is what we are talking about today, how to exercise your social health muscles, not just your physical health muscles.
I, when I read The Great Gatsby, there was a line in it that was along the lines of, I love big parties. They feel so intimate. The way I saw it was like, also, you can feel lonely in a crowded room too, on the other end of the spectrum. Why do you think with with that's some shocking numbers, bordering on 1 million people. Now, for one, I want to get into the biology real quick of that. How does social health impact physical health? Because that's a conversation. But really quickly, there is there's something to be said about feeling lonely, even though there's more than 8 billion people on the planet. There's more connection than ever on our devices. And
Well,
I'm talking to you through the computer. Why is my brain telling me I'm lonely? And why do I feel disconnected? And why does that compound as we age?
because we know that quantity of friends has nothing to do with quality of friends. If you go on vacation, here's a really great way of determining what types of friends are in your life and whether or not they are junk friends like junk food. We know we can eat, we can have our chips and we can have our donuts. We get full, right? That's junk food. We can have quantity of friends on social media and think we are surrounded by numbers, but that also leaves us empty, like the empty calories of junk food. These are junk friends. Let me give you an example. So let's say you're going on vacation. Who do you call to water your plants? You're going on vacation. Who do you call to change the cat litter? Those, by definition, are a much more intimate circle. You don't ask people who you barely know to come into your home and scoop the poop of the cat litter. That is an intimate ask of someone who cares for you and you care for them. And so if you measure your relationships by depth and not breadth, that is a good barometer.
How does I'm traveling, I ask this friend of mine, "Hey, I've got some houseplants and yes, I've got the cat. Can you change the litter?" What is that doing to me physically by knowing that someone's there for me? And I think this just extends in general to friendship. How and why is that affecting my biology? Because from the surface, that doesn't seem necessarily congruent, even though the science says otherwise.
You are correct. The science does say otherwise. So every time you are asked for help and you are performing a service for somebody, your body responds. It is such a good thing for your longevity. You will live longer if you are needed, if you are appreciated, if you are in community with others who rely on you, because that gives you a sense of purpose. But here's the wonderful thing. If that is what is your benefit by giving of yourself, guess what happens? The next time that friend needs something, they will then know because of your authenticity that you asked for help, that they will then know that it's okay to ask you for help. And then you will have that same benefit as well, that you are needed, that you are giving, that you have the power to affect change in somebody else's life. And we know when we're connected, we decrease the inflammation in our bodies. You wanted to talk about the biology of all of this. When we are not socially connected, it can take as many years off your life as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. It
I remember when that
increases,
story came out. That
yeah,
was massive to me. It just
it
felt unbelievable.
yes. And it increases anxiety, it increases depression, it increases your risk of cardiovascular disease, a whole host of issues that are all ameliorated. There is a salve that comes over your body when you invest in your relationships. In fact, there was that Harvard study that showed over the course of, I think, 80 years, that the number one predictor of longevity is not physical health. It is not mental health. It is our social health. It is our relationships as being the undercurrent. What holds us up most, what buoys us the most, are those people, the humans that we choose to surround ourselves with.
What's so surprising to me is that with all the Fitbits, with the whoops and the auras, everyone wants to track everything, right? So whether it's diet or exercise, there's so much discipline and control and compelling stories in the news about these facets of life. I feel like social health is not touched upon very often, yet there's science like the Harvard study that says, wait a minute, literally, this is the one thing we actually have evidence of that literally works. It's not a debate between keto or vegan or all this stuff. Like, if socialization is the ticket, why is the narrative then that longevity is controlled by everything else? And then there's just not as much of a narrative that longevity, the longevity lever, is social.
I think we're getting there.
Mm.
So I would say that the momentum is on our side. I just came back from Atlanta for the Foundation of Social Connection conference. And here in this room were hundreds of change makers, leaders, scientists, all rallying around exactly what we are talking about. And this is at every level of our life right now. This is inside health insurance companies. This is now inside the most major public facing brands that we interact with every single day, both analog and online. So there are ways that we can use our online lives to increase our social health. But the danger is when our online lives displace our in-person lives and become more important. So as long as we can keep that abacus in line and really invest in our in-person relationships, we will come out on the winning side. And I am very upbeat. I am super optimistic about where we are going in our culture right now, because these brands and the science and these researchers, they are really putting in the work now to start healing. And I feel like that is a great place to be.
Is that why you had incentive to write your book? Like, was there a tipping point in your life where you realized how important connection was?
You know, I love your question and I really appreciate it very much. I wrote an article for the New York Times about Dr. Ruth's quest to become New York State's first ambassador to loneliness. In fact, it was the first such role in the entire country and still is. And so the book that we wrote together, The Joy of Connection, was an outgrowth of her need as ambassador to loneliness to put in that work. And so within that context, there were 100 ideas, opportunities, strategies, practical. How do we do this? When I went to the Surgeon General's goodbye celebration in Washington, when Dr. Morphy, who served as the 19th and the 21st Surgeon General of the United States, what he said in a document called his parting prescription for America, he has said that we have forgotten or we can't take for granted, I'm paraphrasing,
Mm.
how we make friends. We can no longer take it for granted that people have the skills to make, nurture, and maintain friendships. That's alarming. And because of his continuing work on the loneliness epidemic, because of his leadership, and now so many others, like I said, who went to Atlanta for the Foundation of Social Connection conference, this is all coalescing. We are providing the scaffolding so people can learn the skills. We talked about exercise. When you go to work out, you learn a routine, you learn how much weight you should press, you learn what kind of classes you may want. Those are skills. When you think about mental health and you think about, let's say, anxiety, we learn skills when it comes to maybe deep breathing. We learn skills when it comes to meditation. We learn how to slow our lives down so we could feel perhaps more in control. That is what we are talking about here with social skills, relationship skills, rebuilding what we had thought we could take for granted, but no longer can.
That it's true. As someone also at my age is a little bit younger than you, I will admit, but as someone who grew up in the first generation that actually was in a loneliness epidemic, that was the first time they ever heard it was from my generation. It really shines a light on the fact that many of us, whether they are young 20 somethings or whether they're in their 70s and have lived an entire life but need to relearn connection, there's a lot there's a lot of skills that we don't have to practice because of convenience sake, but should practice for health sake. And so I want to leave this conversation with you sharing some of the 100 plus practical tips you have. We don't have time for that, but we do have time for two or three. What
Okay,
can people
good.
take away right now if they're like, man, I'm going to take it away. If I want to feel more connected right now, if I want to start practicing and exercising this muscle, I'm not used to exercising. What would
Yes,
you tell me? What would
I
you
love
say?
your question so much. I'm going to give you as much as I can in the time that we have. So, number one, there is research to show that people actually like hearing from you, even when you're scared or anxious or assuming that they don't. So, here's what I mean by that. If you're anxious about reaching out to a friend, because they would reach out to you first if they really wanted to hear from you. So, why would I text them first? The actual data show that we misperceive how much our outbound communication, how well it'll be received. So if somebody is on your mind, don't edit yourself. Don't wait for someone to text you first or for you to call someone first. You reach out. You be the owner of your social life and you take some control over that and don't wait. So that's just number one. Number two, I would say be more curious. If we constantly talk about ourselves and we're constantly talking about our achievements or our challenges, what's going in our lives, and we don't pause even a moment to say, hey, how is that paper you wrote? Did you do okay on that test? Whatever it is. Or did you get that job? I remember you were going after, you were updating your resume.
Mm,
Ask questions, be curious, stop the monologue of what's going on with you, and just take a breath to ask what's going on in somebody else's life. I'll give you just one example of that because sometimes stories are just really effective to kind of illustrate the point. If you have a friend and they tell you that over the break, they're going to Paris and they can't wait to go to Paris. They're so excited to go to Paris. And your first reaction is to say, oh, I loved Paris. You know what I did when I was there? You've all of a sudden made that conversation about you.
instead
You've
of
taken
asking them what they're
away.
excited about.
Yes. Yes.
That I think, yeah, is I think that's a fabulous tidbit because people don't realize it as well. Something I learned as a journalist is people like to talk about themselves. That's the rule of thumb in journalism. Let people talk about themselves. And so my job is to be a sounding board for you and your excitement of whether and showing that you're curious about people makes them feel like they're being heard. And
I
so I
love
feel
that.
like that's what you're saying in this context as well, even with just maintaining friendships and maintaining healthy relationships. Is that correct?
That is so correct. And I'll just end with maybe one quick story that I just think is really illustrative of all we are talking about. You know, when I was working with Dr. Ruth, who, when I met her, was 95 years old. She was this great American icon, just this trailblazing, incredible pioneer. And I was lucky to be in her presence, really feeling fortunate. Every week we would get together to talk about the book, me taking notes, her talking. It was just this incredible collaboration. But before I could leave, she would always ask me one question. She would say, when will I see you again? And let me tell you, at first, that question is very uncomfortable. It puts you on the spot. People are kind of not used to being pushed to take out their calendar, right then and there to commit to the next time. But let me tell you the reverse. The question made me know that she wanted to see me again. It
Mm,
conveyed interest. It showed me that she cared. It told me that I was important to her.
mm.
And you know what? All of that is essential for a great relationship because I knew she wanted to see me again. So maybe the next time you meet a friend for coffee, you say a version like that, which is, when can we do this again?
Oh, that's so helpful for everyone listening. I think that is such a great way to end. And I think the connection to all this is that it's not just feel good, it is good for your health. There's a quite literal connection with your lifespan, your health span, your joy span, and how well you can and how successfully you can connect. And it's something you can nurture. And that right there, even just that alone, people can start practicing with that.
I love what you just said. You will live longer by focusing on your relationships, full stop. You will live longer. Just as you pay attention to your hunger, you eat. Just as you pay attention to your thirst, you drink. When you are lonely, that is your body telling you it is time to seek connection. So I thank you for really being a leader in this conversation. I am so thrilled to have been with you today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This was an absolute pleasure, and I cannot express how lovely it is to share this information and just talk about connection and the idea that longevity is not the diet, it's not just the exercise, it's everything and
It's
it's
everything.
balance. And you
Yes.
showed that. Thank you for your time.
Oh my gosh, thank you for your time.